A slave boy wakes up to find his master's wife on his bed, a moment that stops his world from turning. Their forbidden night together had crossed every boundary their world recognized. But as morning light creeps through the cracks in his cabin walls, she speaks 5 words that will haunt him forever. What happened between them wasn't just dangerous, it was impossible. The plantation's summer heat pressed down like a physical weight, but it wasn't the sun that made Elijah's skin burn. It was her eyes, Isabella's eyes, following him as he worked the fields. The master's wife, barely 20 herself, watched him from the shade of the veranda, her parasol tilted just enough to hide her face from everyone but him. Elijah kept his head down, his hands moving mechanically through the cotton. 3 years of working these fields had taught him that survival depended on invisibility. But how could he disappear when she insisted on seeing him? "Boy, eyes on your work." The overseer's voice cracked like a whip across the field. Jackson hadn't missed the glance Elijah had returned to the big house. "You need something to occupy that wandering mind of yours?" The other slaves stiffened, their bodies remembering the sting of similar lessons. But it wasn't just fear for himself that made Elijah's heart race. It was knowing that her attention could destroy them both. That evening, as the household prepared for the master's dinner party, Elijah was assigned to serve. A punishment disguised as privilege. Standing against the wall, silver tray in hand, he felt her presence before he saw her enter. Isabella floated into the dining room in blue silk that matched the summer sky, her husband's hand possessively at her waist. When she approached for champagne, her fingers brushed his as she took the glass. Between their hands, a folded piece of paper appeared, vanishing into his palm as quickly as it had come. "More wine, boy," the master called, not bothering to look at Elijah's face. But what started as a dangerous curiosity was about to become something far more devastating for them both. The library was the only room in the plantation house where Elijah could breathe. 2 weeks had passed since Isabella's note, a simple request written in elegant script. Library, midnight, help required. Now, these midnight meetings had become a dangerous ritual, each one a small rebellion against the order of their world. "Read this passage aloud," Isabella whispered, sliding a leather-bound volume across the polished desk. Her husband was away on business again, leaving her to the supposed protection of household staff who could be bribed to forget what they saw. The heavy curtains were drawn tight against prying eyes, the only light coming from a single candle between them. Elijah's fingers trembled slightly as they touched the book. His literacy was his most closely guarded secret, learned in stolen moments from his mother before she was sold away. Discovery would mean the lash, or worse. The pages felt like fire beneath his fingertips, both dangerous and illuminating. "All men are created equal," he read softly, voice gaining strength with each word. "They are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights." Isabella leaned forward, candlelight catching in her eyes. The flame reflected there seemed to dance with something more than just physical light, a hunger for understanding, for connection. "Do you believe that, Elijah?" His name in her mouth was itself a transgression. Slaves had no names to their masters, only functions. Boy, field hand, porter. The sound of it in her refined accent made him pause, reminded him of the precipice they balanced upon. "I believe it," he answered carefully, "though the world does not." He closed the book, his calloused fingers a stark contrast against the fine leather binding. These words were not written with men like me in mind. My world doesn't believe it either. Her hand rested inches from his on the desk, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. "I was sold as surely as any slave. The only difference is my bill of sale came with a marriage certificate and society's blessing." The comparison hung dangerously between them. Elijah knew the vast gulf separating their circumstances. She might feel trapped, but her cage was gilded. Her suffering, real as it might be, came with silk dresses and silver spoons. Still, in these midnight hours, their shared isolation created a tenuous bridge between worlds that daylight would never permit. "You have choices I cannot imagine," he said finally, his voice low, "but I understand what it means to live at another's whim." She nodded, a strand of auburn hair falling loose from her careful arrangement. She didn't move to fix it. Here, in this room, appearances seemed less important than they did in the harsh light of day. "Tell me about the books you've read," she said, changing the subject. "All of them. No one speaks to me of ideas here, only weather and gossip and whose daughter has made an advantageous match." And so their nights unfolded. Literature, philosophy, poetry, words flowing between them like forbidden wine. Sometimes she read to him, her voice painting worlds beyond the plantation's borders. Sometimes he spoke of his mother's stories, traditions carried across an ocean in the hold of a slave ship, preserved despite everything that had been taken. "My mother told me that words have power," Elijah said one night, after they had discussed a volume of poetry, "that knowing words others don't want you to know is its own kind of freedom." Isabella's eyes widened at this. "Is that why you risked learning to read? For freedom?" "For something like it," he admitted. "The master can control my body, but not my mind. Not unless I surrender it." On another night, when thunder rumbled outside and rain lashed against the windows, she confessed her own small rebellions. "I've been keeping accounts," she whispered, showing him a small leather journal. "Every penny spent, every transaction. My husband thinks me too simple for numbers, but if anything ever happened to him—" She trailed off, leaving the thought unfinished. What neither of them realized was that these midnight conversations were igniting a fire that would soon burn beyond their control. Each shared thought, each accidental brush of fingers passing a book, each moment of understanding that flashed between them. All of it building toward something neither could name but both could feel approaching, inevitable as the dawn. The danger lay not just in discovery, though that would be catastrophic enough, but in the growing sense that in this room, with these books between them, they were becoming something new to each other. Not master and slave, not even man and woman, but two minds reaching across an impossible divide, finding in each other something long sought and never expected: recognition. And in a world built on the denial of such recognition, nothing could be more threatening to the order of things. The summer stretched on, hot and relentless. By day, Elijah worked until his muscles burned and sweat soaked through his threadbare shirt, the cotton fields seeming to stretch endlessly under the merciless southern sun. The overseer, Jackson, had been watching him more closely since the dinner party. His small eyes narrowed with suspicion whenever Elijah was called to the main house. By night, when he could slip away, the library became their sanctuary, a world apart from the brutal realities of plantation life. What had begun as reading sessions had transformed into something more profound. Isabella was teaching him to write. "Your letters are improving," she murmured, watching as his hand moved across the paper. They sat closer now than they had in those first meetings, her shoulder occasionally brushing his as she leaned in to correct his penmanship. The contact, though fleeting, sent currents of awareness through them both. "You have a natural grace with the pen." Elijah studied his own handwriting with critical eyes. The letters were becoming more uniform, the lines straighter. Still, compared to Isabella's elegant script, his efforts seemed crude. "Not as fine as yours." "But stronger," she replied, "more determined." She traced a finger lightly over the word he had written, freedom, careful not to smudge the still drying ink. "Your hand presses firmly, with purpose. Mine was taught to be decorative, like everything else about me." The compliment lingered between them, weighted with meaning neither dared explore directly. Instead, they turned to safer territory, the content of his writing. "Tell me about this place you've described," Isabella said, pointing to the paragraph he'd composed. This river and the people who lived beside it. Your words make it feel so real, as if you've walked along its banks yourself." Elijah's expression shifted, grew distant with memory. The candle flame reflected in his dark eyes as he recalled stories passed down through generations. "My grandmother spoke of it, before they took her from her homeland. She said the river was wide as the sky in places, that it flooded each year bringing new soil, new life. The people there built their lives around its rhythms, planting when the waters receded, celebrating when the fish were plentiful." "She remembered it clearly?" Isabella asked, her voice hushed with reverence for this connection to a world she had never known. "Until the day she died," Elijah said. "She would describe the smell of the air after rain, the sound of the women singing as they worked, the taste of fruits that don't grow here." His voice took on a rhythmic quality, almost like reciting poetry. "She taught my mother, and my mother taught me, so that something of that place would survive, even if we never see it." "You've never seen it yourself?" "No," he said softly. "But sometimes I dream of it. Sometimes it feels more real than this place." He gestured vaguely toward the window, beyond which lay the plantation that owned his body but not his mind. Isabella's hand moved toward his, hesitated, then settled on the edge of the paper instead. The distance between their fingers could be measured in inches, but the gap it represented was vast and dangerous. Dreams can be dangerous things. "So can teaching a slave to write," he answered, his eyes meeting hers directly. The air between them thickened. Outside, cicadas thrummed their endless summer song, and somewhere in the house a clock chimed once, midnight, their time growing short. "My husband returns the day after tomorrow," Isabella said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's bringing guests from Charleston. Important men, he says." Elijah nodded, understanding the warning beneath her words. When the master was home, their meetings would be impossible. The risk, already great, would become unthinkable. "We should stop for tonight," Isabella said, though she made no move to gather the papers scattered across the desk. "Yes," Elijah agreed, equally motionless. In the candlelight, shadows played across her features, softening them, making her seem younger, more vulnerable than the poised mistress of the house who glided through rooms giving orders by day. A strand of hair had come loose from her simple braid. She wore her hair differently for these meetings, without the elaborate styling her public appearances required. Here now she was simply a woman with ink-stained fingers and ideas she wasn't supposed to possess. "Do you ever think about what your life might have been?" she asked suddenly. "If you had been born free, or if—" She stopped herself, perhaps realizing the cruelty of such speculation. But Elijah answered anyway. "I used to imagine it all the time. A different life, a different world." He looked down at his hands, calloused from labor. "Now I think more about what might still be." Something in his tone made her breath catch. "What do you mean?" He hesitated, weighing how much to reveal. "There are places, even in the South, where a man like me might live differently. And further north—" He trailed off, not needing to complete the thought. Isabella's eyes widened slightly. "You've heard things. People talk, even when they think we're not listening." His voice remained steady, but there was an intensity in his gaze that hadn't been there before. "Words travel between plantations. News of what's happening in other states." She looked away, toward the shelves of books that lined the walls, books that spoke of liberty, of natural rights, of revolutions. Books her husband collected but rarely read, seeing them as symbols of cultivation rather than dangerous ideas. It would be a terrible risk. "Life is already a risk," Elijah replied. "Every day." The weight of that truth settled between them. For a long moment, neither spoke, the only sound the soft hiss of the candle flame and their measured breathing. "Tomorrow," he said finally, breaking the spell, "I'll bring you something." Her eyebrows lifted in question. A story my mother told me. I've been writing it down, a little each night." He didn't mention that he kept the pages hidden beneath a loose floorboard in the cabin he shared with 3 other men, or that discovery of such writing would earn him a whipping that might kill him. "It's about a trickster who outwits a powerful spirit to bring water to his people during a drought." The smile that bloomed across Isabella's face made his heart stutter in his chest. It was genuine in a way her social smiles never were, unguarded, almost girlish with delight. "I would like that very much," she whispered, finally gathering her skirts to stand. "I'll leave the window unlatched, the one behind the rose trellis." As she moved toward the door, she paused, looking back at him. "Elijah," she said, his name a forbidden intimacy on her lips. "Be careful tomorrow. Jackson has been asking questions about why you look less tired than the others despite the work." He nodded, understanding the warning. "I'll remember my place," he said, the words carrying a double meaning they both understood. "And I'll remember mine," she replied, a touch of bitterness in her tone. After she had gone, Elijah carefully gathered the writing materials, returning them to their proper places. He moved silently through the darkened house, a shadow among shadows, well practiced in the art of invisibility. As he slipped out through the kitchen door, the night air heavy with jasmine and magnolia, his mind was already composing the next part of his story. Not just the one he would share with Isabella, but the one he was beginning to imagine for himself. Neither of them noticed the shadow that had passed briefly across the library door earlier, nor heard the soft footsteps retreating down the hallway, footsteps belonging to Harriet, Isabella's personal maid, whose loyalty to her mistress was genuine, but whose understanding of the dangers at play ran deeper than either Elijah or Isabella could know. The return of Master Jonathan Caldwell to Willow Creek Plantation brought with it a stifling tension that permeated every corner of the estate. 3 carriages had arrived just before sunset, carrying not only the master but also his distinguished guests from Charleston, a judge, a cotton broker, and a politician whose name was whispered with both reverence and fear throughout the South. The plantation had been in a frenzy of preparation for days, floors polished to a mirror shine, silver burnished, linens pressed to crisp perfection, and the best livestock slaughtered for the feasts to come. Elijah stood at attention among the other house servants, eyes properly lowered as the gentlemen descended from their carriages. He had been reassigned from field work to house service for the duration of the visit, a decision that brought him dangerous proximity to Isabella, but also placed him under the constant scrutiny of both the guests and Caldwell himself. The irony wasn't lost on him. His illiteracy, the very thing that could get him killed, had also made him valuable for service in the main house where quick understanding of instructions was prized. "Magnificent property, Jonathan," remarked Judge Thornton, a corpulent man with shrewd eyes and a reputation for harsh sentencing, as he surveyed the white-columned mansion and manicured grounds. "You've done well for yourself since our university days." Caldwell's chest swelled with pride. He was a tall man, handsome in the conventional way of wealthy planters, though the past few years had added a softness to his jaw and a redness to his complexion that spoke of indulgence. The land yields generously when properly managed. His gaze swept across the assembled servants, lingering momentarily on Elijah. "Discipline is essential, of course?" "Of course," echoed the politician, Senator Hargrove, a lean, silver-haired man whose soft voice belied his reputation for ruthlessness in the state legislature. "Speaking of discipline, I understand there's been trouble again in Beaufort County. Slaves found with pamphlets, revolutionary ideas." He lowered his voice, though not enough to prevent Elijah from hearing. "Abolitionists growing bolder by the day." Elijah maintained his posture of subservience while his mind raced. He had heard rumors of the Beaufort incident. 3 enslaved men caught with written materials, 1 hanged as an example. The others sold farther south, families separated without a moment's notice. Word had traveled through the underground network that connected plantations. Whispers passed during Sunday gatherings, messages carried by slaves who accompanied their masters on visits, coded information shared in spirituals sung in the fields. "We'll discuss such matters after dinner," Caldwell replied, his tone light but carrying an undercurrent of steel. "No need to trouble ourselves with unpleasantness upon your arrival." He turned toward the house. "Isabella, my dear," Caldwell called, and she appeared in the doorway, a vision in blue silk, her hair elaborately arranged, face composed in a perfect mask of wifely devotion. "Come welcome our guests." If Elijah hadn't known better, he would never have recognized her as the same woman who sat beside him in the library, ink on her fingers and passion in her voice as they discussed Voltaire and Rousseau. This Isabella moved with practiced grace, her gestures delicate, her conversation limited to pleasant inquiries about the journey and the health of the gentlemen's families. She was performing, just as he was, though her role demanded smiles instead of invisibility. "Judge Thornton, how lovely to see you again," she said, extending her hand. "And Senator Hargrove, Mr. Hamilton, welcome to Willow Creek. I trust your journey wasn't too taxing?" "Not at all, Mrs. Caldwell," Hamilton replied, the cotton broker whose family owned 3 plantations along the coast. "The prospect of your husband's hospitality and your charming company made any discomfort worthwhile." Only once did her eyes meet Elijah's, a fleeting connection as she instructed him to bring refreshments to the veranda. In that brief moment, he read both warning and regret. Her gaze held something else, too, a tension that hadn't been there before her husband's return. As Elijah moved about his duties, he overheard fragments of conversation, discussion of cotton prices, political maneuverings in Washington, complaints about increased Northern interference in Southern affairs. The men spoke freely in front of the servants, considering them no more capable of understanding complex matters than the furniture. "My shipment to Liverpool was delayed by those damnable inspections," Hamilton was saying as Elijah served chilled lemonade on the veranda. "As if we're smugglers rather than legitimate businessmen." "The British have become insufferable since they abolished slavery in their territories," Caldwell agreed. "They've forgotten that their mills depend on our cotton." "Perhaps they need a reminder," Senator Hargrove suggested. "Economic pressure can be most persuasive." Later that evening, as Elijah served dinner to the assembled company, the conversation turned to matters that made his hands tremble slightly as he poured wine. The dining room glittered with candlelight reflecting off crystal and silver, the air heavy with the scent of roasted meats and Isabella's jasmine perfume. "The problem," Senator Hargrove was saying, "is not merely the abolitionists themselves, but those who enabled them by educating slaves, teaching them to read, filling their heads with notions above their station." He stabbed emphatically at his roast duck. "It undermines the very foundation of our society." "Quite right," agreed Hamilton, dabbing his mouth with a fine linen napkin. "My cousin had to sell 3 valuable field hands last spring after discovering his daughter had been teaching them their letters. Sentimental foolishness nearly cost him his reputation." Isabella's fork paused halfway to her lips. "What happened to the daughter?" she asked, her voice carefully neutral, though Elijah detected the slight tightening of her fingers around her silverware. The men chuckled. "Sent to her aunt in Virginia," Hamilton replied, "where she might learn proper ladylike pursuits instead of dangerous philanthropy." "My wife," Caldwell interjected with a proprietorial smile, "confines her charitable impulses to appropriate channels: the church, orphaned children, widows." His hand covered hers on the tablecloth, his thumb stroking her wrist in a gesture that might appear affectionate to others, but caused Isabella's shoulders to stiffen imperceptibly. "She understands the natural order of things." "Fortunate man," Judge Thornton commented, his gaze lingering on Isabella in a way that made Elijah's jaw tighten. "Beauty and wisdom in one package." Isabella's smile remained fixed, perfect. "You flatter me, sir." She turned to her husband. "Jonathan, perhaps Elijah could bring that special port you've been saving. I believe our guests would appreciate it." As Elijah moved to obey, he felt Caldwell's eyes following him. Something in the master's expression had changed, a new watchfulness that sent a chill down Elijah's spine. It reminded him of the way the overseer looked at field hands he suspected of malingering, calculating, suspicious. In the relative safety of the wine cellar, Elijah took a moment to breathe deeply, steadying himself. The cool, earthen-floored room smelled of oak barrels and cork. As he located the port, carefully removing the bottle from its resting place, he heard footsteps on the stairs and straightened immediately, bottle in hand. It was Harriet, Isabella's maid. Her expression was grave, her normally composed features tight with worry. At 35, she had served the household since before Isabella's arrival as a bride, and knew its rhythms and secrets better than anyone. "Be careful," she whispered, glancing back up the stairs. "Master's been asking questions about you, about your whereabouts at night." Elijah's heart hammered against his ribs. "What did you tell him?" "That you sleep in the cabin like everyone else." Her eyes held his. "But he's not convinced. And that overseer, Jackson, he told Master he's seen you near the house after dark." "Thank you," Elijah said quietly. He had always been on good terms with Harriet, but he hadn't realized she would protect him. She nodded once. "Miss Isabella has been kind to me. Better than most." A pause. "But whatever's between you two, it can't end well. You know that." "There's nothing improper," Elijah began, but Harriet cut him off with a sharp gesture. "Don't insult me by lying," she said. "I've seen how you look at each other. I've noticed the books, moved in the library, the candle wax on the desk." Her voice softened. "I don't judge you. God knows there's little enough kindness in this world, but Master Caldwell, he would kill you both." Before he could respond, she was gone, slipping back up the stairs as silently as she had come. Elijah stood motionless in the cellar, the cool glass of the port bottle against his palm the only thing anchoring him to reality. Harriet knew. How many others had noticed? The thought sent ice through his veins. When he returned to the dining room, the conversation had shifted to politics. Senator Hargrove was expounding on the necessity of expanding slavery into the Western territories. "It's not merely an economic imperative," he was saying, "but a moral one. Our peculiar institution provides structure and purpose to an inferior race incapable of self-governance. To abandon them to freedom would be the height of cruelty." Judge Thornton nodded sagely. "I've seen the condition of so-called free Negroes in Philadelphia. Wretched, dissolute creatures for the most part. They lack the guidance our system provides." Elijah poured the port with steady hands, years of practice allowing him to maintain an impassive expression despite the bile rising in his throat. As he served Isabella, he noticed a small, nearly invisible ink stain on her index finger, evidence of their secret meetings that no one else would recognize. She had tried to scrub it away, but traces remained, like their connection itself. "What say you, Caldwell?" Hamilton asked. "Will you join the venture? The new plantation in Louisiana promises exceptional returns. With land so fertile even an incompetent overseer couldn't fail to profit." Caldwell swirled the port in his glass, considering. "I might be persuaded, though Isabella is reluctant to travel so far from her family in Virginia." All eyes turned to Isabella, who lowered her gaze demurely. "I would never stand in the way of my husband's business interests," she said softly, "though I admit the thought of such distance is daunting." "Women," chuckled Judge Thornton indulgently, "always fearful of change." "Not fearful," Isabella corrected gently. "Merely cautious. Louisiana has a reputation for disease that cannot be ignored." "A valid concern," Senator Hargrove conceded, "though I understand the higher elevations are quite healthful." The conversation continued, plans being made that would affect dozens of lives without consideration for those most impacted. Elijah, standing at attention against the wall, absorbed every word, understanding that his future and Isabella's hung in the balance of these casual dinner discussions. That night, there was no meeting in the library. The house remained brightly lit until late, voices and laughter from the study where the men retired for cigars and political discussion drifting through the windows. Elijah, released from his duties, made his way back to the cabin, acutely aware of being watched. Jackson, the overseer, stood smoking a pipe near the kitchen gardens, his squat figure silhouetted against the moonlight. His eyes followed Elijah's progress across the yard. "Bit late to be finishing up, ain't it?" he called out, his voice carrying in the still night air. "Master Caldwell required additional service for his guests," Elijah replied evenly, keeping his eyes appropriately lowered. Jackson grunted. "Fancy yourself above the others now, don't you? Working in the big house, wearing them fine clothes." He stepped closer, tobacco smoke wreathing his face. "Don't forget what you are, boy." "No, sir," Elijah murmured, the words ashen in his mouth. "Get on with you, then," Jackson said, making a dismissive gesture. "Dawn comes early, and you'll be back in the fields once these visitors leave." The threat was clear. His assignment to house service was temporary, a reminder that any privileges could be revoked at the master's whim. In the darkness of the cabin, lying on his thin pallet, he reached beneath the loose floorboard and touched the pages of writing he had hidden there. The story for Isabella, yes, but also something more dangerous. A crude map of the route north, passed to him by a traveling blacksmith who had connections to the Underground Railroad. The paper felt like fire against his fingertips, its mere possession enough to condemn him. Around him, the other men slept, their breathing creating a rhythm that had once been comforting in its familiarity. Now it reminded him of time passing, opportunities slipping away with each exhalation. Samuel, the oldest among them at nearly 50, had once spoken of running. That was 3 years ago. They found him in the swamp, brought him back, and made an example of him that still haunted Elijah's dreams. Samuel never spoke of freedom again. His spirit had been broken along with his body. 3 days, Elijah thought. 3 days until the visitors departed. 3 days to decide whether the risk of staying had become greater than the risk of flight. If he went, could he leave Isabella behind? If he stayed, how long before their secret was discovered? Across the plantation, in the main house, Isabella sat at her dressing table while Harriet brushed out her hair. The elaborate coiffure that had impressed the dinner guests now fell in auburn waves down her back. "You're very quiet tonight, Miss Isabella," Harriet observed, their eyes meeting in the mirror. "I have a headache," Isabella replied. The gentleman's conversation was rather taxing. Harriet's hands paused briefly in their rhythmic brushing. "I spoke with Elijah earlier," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. Isabella's reflection paled. "Oh." "I warned him to be careful. Master Caldwell has suspicions." "What kind of suspicions?" Isabella asked, her composure slipping for the first time that day. "He asked me if I'd noticed anything unusual about your behavior, if you'd been keeping late hours in the library." Harriet resumed brushing. "I told him you sometimes suffer from insomnia and find reading helps you sleep." "Thank you," Isabella breathed. "Don't thank me yet," Harriet cautioned. "He's instructed Jackson to keep watch on the house at night." Isabella closed her eyes briefly, her hands clasping tightly in her lap. "I see." "Whatever you're planning, whatever he's planning, it needs to wait," Harriet said, "at least until the guests leave and Master Caldwell's attention is elsewhere." "We're not planning anything," Isabella said, but the protest sounded hollow even to her own ears. Harriet set down the brush and began braiding Isabella's hair for sleep. "I've served your family for 17 years, Miss Isabella. I've kept your secret since you were a girl. I'll keep this one, too." Her fingers worked deftly, weaving the thick strands. "But I'm begging you to be careful. For both your sakes." Before Isabella could respond, there was a knock at the bedroom door, and Jonathan Caldwell entered without waiting for an invitation. His face was flushed from port and self-satisfaction. "Leave us, Harriet," he commanded, already loosening his cravat. With a curtsy and a last meaningful glance at Isabella, Harriet departed, closing the door softly behind her. "You were quiet at dinner," Caldwell said, moving behind his wife and placing his hands on her shoulders. His touch was possessive, his fingers pressing into her flesh with just enough force to remind her of his strength. "I trust you're not feeling unwell?" "Just a slight headache," Isabella replied, meeting his gaze in the mirror with the practiced smile she reserved for him. "Your guests are most interesting, however. The judge in particular seems very knowledgeable." Caldwell's expression softened slightly. "You played your part well. Hamilton commented on what a credit you are to me." His hands moved from her shoulders to her throat, fingers tracing the line of her collarbone. "I've been thinking about Louisiana. The opportunity is significant." "Whatever you decide, I will support," Isabella said, the words she had repeated countless times throughout their marriage. "That's my good wife," Caldwell murmured, bending to kiss the top of her head. "Always dutiful." Later, after he had taken his husbandly rights and fallen into a deep sleep beside her, Isabella stared at the ceiling of her bedchamber while her husband's heavy breathing filled the room. The moonlight streaming through the window illuminated the portrait of her as a bride that hung on the opposite wall. A young woman with hopeful eyes and a forced smile, unaware of what her future would hold. She thought of Elijah, of the stories they had shared in whispered conversations, of the way his eyes lit up when he described his grandmother's homeland. She thought of the careful way he formed his letters, determined to master a skill that could get him killed. She thought of the warmth that spread through her chest whenever their hands accidentally touched over a book. What began as lessons, her attempt to relieve the crushing boredom of plantation life by teaching someone who actually wanted to learn, had become something she had no words to describe. Not love, surely. Such a thing was impossible, unthinkable. And yet... Neither of them slept that night, separated by walls and circumstance, yet bound by secrets that grew more perilous with each passing hour. Both aware that the fragile world they had created in the library was crumbling around them, and that choices would soon need to be made that could not be unmade. In the east, the first hints of dawn began to lighten the sky, bringing with it the second day of the visitor's stay, and 24 fewer hours to decide their fates. The second day of the Caldwell plantation's distinguished visitors dawned hot and oppressive. Clouds hung low on the horizon, promising a storm by evening, while the air remained still and thick with humidity. Nature itself seemed to mirror the tension building within the walls of Willow Creek. Elijah rose before the others in his cabin, splashing water on his face from the communal bucket. Sleep had eluded him, leaving dark circles beneath his eyes that he hoped wouldn't be noticed. As he buttoned his house livery, a jacket of finer quality than anything he wore in the fields, Samuel stirred on his palate. "You look like death warmed over," the older man observed quietly, his voice roughened by years of cotton dust. "Something troubling you besides the obvious?" Elijah hesitated. Samuel had once been like him, restless, questioning, dreaming of something beyond their shared bondage. The brutal punishment he'd received for his escape attempt had left him not only with a permanent limp, but also a careful resignation that bordered on wisdom. "Just tired," Elijah replied. "The master's guests keep late hours." Samuel's eyes, still sharp despite the years of hardship etched into his face, studied him. "Be careful in that house," he said finally. "Something's changed. I can feel it." "What do you mean?" "Overseers talking more than usual, Master Caldwell asking questions about who goes where after dark." Samuel sat up with a grimace, his damaged leg clearly paining him. "Word is, there's been trouble with runaways 2 counties over. Got the masters spooked?" Elijah's pulse quickened, but he kept his expression neutral. "I hadn't heard." "Wouldn't have," Samuel agreed. "They're keeping it quiet. But my Mary works in the kitchen at the Peterson place. Their cook told her 3 slaves disappeared last week, just vanished. He lowered his voice further. And they could read, all 3 of them. The implication hung in the air between them. Literacy among slaves was increasingly viewed not merely as a violation of social norms, but as a dangerous precursor to rebellion. "I should go," Elijah said, adjusting his collar. "They'll be expecting breakfast soon." Samuel nodded, but as Elijah reached the door, he called out softly, "Whatever you're thinking of doing, don't. Not yet. Eyes everywhere right now." With those ominous words echoing in his mind, Elijah made his way toward the main house. The grounds were already stirring with activity, field hands moving toward the distant cotton rows, house servants preparing for the day's work, stable boys exercising the master's prized horses. Everything appeared normal, yet Elijah sensed a subtle difference. More glances in his direction, more hushed conversations that stopped when he approached. In the kitchen, the usual morning chaos reigned as cook barked orders and servants scurried to prepare an elaborate breakfast for the household and their guests. Harriet was there, supervising the arrangement of Isabella's breakfast tray. "Fresh flowers," she instructed a young maid, "and make sure the coffee is hot this time." Her eyes met Elijah's briefly, a warning in their depths. She tilted her head slightly toward the butler's pantry. Elijah waited until no one was watching, then slipped inside the small room where silver was stored and polished. Harriet joined him moments later, closing the door partially to avoid arousing suspicion, while still allowing them to see if anyone approached. "Master Caldwell asked for you specifically this morning," she said without preamble. "Wants you to attend to the gentlemen during their shooting expedition." Elijah frowned. "That's usually Thomas's responsibility." "Thomas has been sent to deliver a message to the Wilkinson plantation. He won't be back until evening." Harriet's fingers worried at her apron. Miss Isabella tried to suggest another arrangement, but the master insisted. The implication was clear. Caldwell wanted Elijah away from the house and away from Isabella for the day. "There's more," Harriet continued, her voice barely audible. "I overheard the gentleman talking last night after you left. Senator Hargrove mentioned something about testing the house servants. Said he has a method for determining if a slave can read." Cold dread settled in Elijah's stomach. "What kind of test?" "I don't know." They lowered their voices after that. Harriet glanced toward the door. "Be careful what you say, what you do. Don't show any understanding beyond what's expected." "And Miss Isabella?" "She knows. I warned her." Harriet's expression softened slightly. "She was writing something when I brought her tea this morning. Burned it in the fireplace before I could see what it was." Before Elijah could respond, Cook's voice rang out, calling for Harriet. With a last, meaningful look, she slipped out of the pantry, leaving him alone with his mounting anxiety. The shooting party departed mid-morning, after a breakfast that stretched for nearly 2 hours. Caldwell, Thornton, Hargrove, and Hamilton rode on horseback, with Elijah and 2 other servants following on foot, carrying ammunition, refreshments, and equipment for the gentlemen's sport. They headed toward the western edge of the plantation, where a field had been prepared with targets. The day grew hotter as they walked, sweat soaking through Elijah's jacket despite his efforts to maintain a dignified appearance. "Magnificent specimen," Judge Thornton remarked, nodding toward Elijah as they reached the shooting ground. "Strong shoulders, good height. You must get excellent work from him." Caldwell dismounted, handing the reins to one of the servants. "Efficient enough, though I've had some concerns lately about his attitude. Seems to have developed notions." "Ah," Senator Hargrove interjected, "the very problem we discussed. Perhaps we should conduct our little experiment." Hamilton chuckled. "Jonathan, you're fortunate to have friends willing to help you identify potential troublemakers before they cause real problems." Elijah kept his face carefully blank as he arranged the shooting equipment, though his heart raced. Whatever test they had planned, he needed to fail it convincingly. "Bring the refreshments," Caldwell ordered him. and then we'll have need of your assistance with a small matter." Elijah obeyed, retrieving the basket containing brandy, cold meats, and bread. As he set it down on the small folding table, he noticed a newspaper spread out beside it, the Charleston Mercury, its headlines boldly proclaiming debates in Congress over territorial expansion. "Can you pour the brandy?" Caldwell asked, his tone deceptively casual. "And perhaps you might help the senator with his new pamphlet. He's considering distributing it to all plantation owners in the state." Senator Hargrove pulled a slim booklet from his coat pocket. "Yes, I'd value an additional perspective. The title might be too complex." He held out the pamphlet so that the cover faced Elijah directly. "What do you think? Too wordy, perhaps?" The trap was obvious now. The pamphlet's title, "Practical Considerations for Maintaining Discipline Among Bondsmen," was clearly visible. If Elijah showed any sign of comprehending the words, he would reveal his literacy. He stared at the pamphlet blankly, as if the text were meaningless symbols, while carefully pouring brandy into 4 glasses. "I don't understand, master," he said, adopting the slightly confused tone that slaves were expected to use when confronted with matters beyond their comprehension. "You want me to look at the pictures?" Senator Hargrove's eyes narrowed slightly. "There are no pictures, boy. Just words. Important words about people like you." Elijah blinked, maintaining his facade of incomprehension. "If you say so, master." Judge Thornton laughed. "Well, that seems definitive enough. Can't even recognize that it's about his own kind." "Perhaps," Caldwell said, not entirely convinced. "Though some are clever at hiding their abilities." He pointed to the newspaper. "Boy, what's that there on the table?" "Paper, master," Elijah replied promptly, allowing a slight smile as if pleased with himself for knowing this much. "For starting fires, and such." The men exchanged glances, their suspicion visibly easing. "I told you, Jonathan," Hamilton said, clapping Caldwell on the shoulder. "You're letting Isabella's behavior make you paranoid. The girl reads too many novels, that's all, filling her head with sentimental nonsense about the condition of your servants." "You're probably right," Caldwell conceded, though something in his expression remained unconvinced. "Still, I think a change of scenery might benefit her. Louisiana would provide new perspectives." The conversation shifted to business matters as the men began their shooting practice, taking turns firing at targets while discussing cotton prices and political appointments. Elijah stood at attention, ready to reload weapons and fetch whatever they required, all while maintaining his mask of dull subservience. Inside, however, his mind raced. If Caldwell was seriously considering moving to Louisiana, it would mean not only separation from everything and everyone Elijah knew, but also the end of any possibility of escape. The Deep South was notoriously difficult territory for runaways, with harsher slave codes and greater distances to free states. More immediately concerning was Caldwell's suspicion about Isabella's activities. If he believed she was teaching slaves to read, or even sympathizing too deeply with their condition, the consequences could be severe. Southern society had strict expectations for plantation mistresses, and those who challenged the institution of slavery, even indirectly, faced ostracism at best. As the afternoon wore on, the heat became nearly unbearable. Thunder rumbled in the distance, the promised storm approaching. The gentleman, flushed with brandy and exertion, finally decided to return to the house. "Enough sport for one day," Judge Thornton declared, mopping his brow with a handkerchief. "And I believe we've put your concerns to rest, Caldwell. The boy clearly can't read a word." "So it seems," Caldwell agreed, though his gaze lingered on Elijah with an intensity that suggested the matter wasn't entirely settled. They rode back more slowly than they had come, the horses tired and the men mellowed by alcohol. As they approached the main house, Elijah saw Isabella standing on the veranda, a book in her hand. She wore a simple day dress of pale green, her hair arranged more casually than it had been for dinner the previous evening. "Gentlemen," she called, setting the book aside as they drew near. "I trust your expedition was successful?" "Thornton proved himself the superior marksman," Caldwell replied, dismounting, "though Hargrove claims the sun was in his eyes." The men laughed, the camaraderie of shared sport and privilege evident in their ease with one another. Isabella smiled politely, but Elijah noticed the tension in her posture, the way her fingers gripped the railing too tightly. "I've had lemonade prepared," she said, "and Cook promises that dinner will be especially fine tonight." The gentleman moved toward the house. Isabella's gaze briefly met Elijah's. In that fleeting moment, he read both question and answer. She was asking if he had passed their test, and he was confirming that he had. The relief in her eyes was palpable, though quickly masked as she turned to follow her husband inside. Elijah led the horses toward the stable, his mind still processing the events of the day. He had escaped detection for now, but Caldwell's suspicions hadn't been entirely allayed, and the talk of Louisiana represented a new and unexpected threat. As he handed the reins to the stable boy, he noticed Jackson watching him from the shadow of the carriage house. The overseer's expression was unreadable, but his constant presence had become increasingly ominous. That evening, as Elijah served dinner to the household and their guests, the conversation flowed more freely than it had the previous night. The men, relaxed from their day's sport and the liberal application of Caldwell's best wines, spoke openly of matters they might otherwise have discussed more discreetly. "The Fugitive Slave Act has been a disappointment," Hamilton declared, attacking his roast beef with enthusiasm. "Too many Northern magistrates refusing to enforce it properly, slaves still disappearing, and those abolitionists harboring them with impunity." "The law requires strengthening," Senator Hargrove agreed. "I've proposed amendments that would impose harsher penalties on those who assist runaways. Make an example of a few Northern sympathizers, and the rest will fall in line." "The fundamental problem," Judge Thornton interjected, "is the growing sentiment against our way of life. These abolitionists' publications, these incendiary novels, they're poisoning the national discourse." Isabella, who had been largely silent throughout the meal, looked up at this. "You're referring to Uncle Tom's Cabin, I presume?" A momentary silence fell over the table. The novel, published 3 years earlier, had become both a sensation in the North and an object of vilification in the South. "Among others," Thornton replied stiffly. "Slanderous propaganda, the lot of it." "Have you read it?" Isabella asked, her tone innocent but her question pointed. Caldwell's hand tightened around his wine glass. "Isabella, I don't believe the judge's reading habits are an appropriate dinner topic." "Forgive me," she said, lowering her eyes. "I merely wondered if one must read such works to know their content, or if reputation alone is sufficient for judgment." The implication that the men were condemning literature they hadn't actually read hung in the air like the approaching storm outside. Thunder rumbled closer now, and rain had begun to patter against the windows. "A fair question," Senator Hargrove said after an uncomfortable pause. "And no, Mrs. Caldwell, I haven't found it necessary to soil my mind with Mrs. Stowe's fabrications. The reviews from reputable Southern newspapers have been quite thorough in exposing its falsehoods." "Of course," Isabella murmured. "How efficient." Elijah, circulating with a platter of vegetables, kept his expression carefully neutral, though inwardly he marveled at Isabella's courage, or recklessness. She was challenging these powerful men in the only way available to her, through the subtle weapons of irony and implication. Caldwell, clearly sensing the dangerous undercurrent, quickly steered the conversation to safer topics: the upcoming horse races in Charleston, a mutual acquaintance's new steamboat investment, the prospects for the season's cotton yield. The moment passed, but Elijah noticed that Caldwell's gaze returned to his wife more frequently, his expression thoughtful and assessing. After dinner, as the gentlemen again retired to the study for cigars and brandy, Elijah was instructed to remain in the dining room to clear the table, a task normally left to the younger house servants. As he carefully stacked the fine china, he became aware of Isabella lingering in the doorway. "Was everything satisfactory, ma'am?" he asked formally, conscious that they might be observed or overheard. "Quite," she replied, her voice carrying the proper mistress-to-servant tone. Then, more quietly as she moved into the room, "They tested you today." It wasn't a question, but he nodded slightly as he continued his work. "I played my part." "As did I," she said, absently straightening a candlestick, though perhaps not as convincingly. "You shouldn't provoke them," Elijah murmured, glancing toward the door to ensure they were still alone. "What would you have me do? Simper and agree while they plan to drag us all deeper into darkness?" Her voice remained low, but emotion made it tremble slightly. "Jonathan is seriously considering Louisiana, Elijah. He's been offered partnership in a new plantation. We would leave within the month." The news, though not unexpected after the day's conversations, still hit him like a physical blow. "All of us." "Only those he considers valuable. The others would be sold." Her eyes met his. Fear and determination mingled in their depths. "We need to talk properly. Tonight." "It's too dangerous," he protested. "Jackson has been watching the house, and after your performance at dinner—" "2 hours past midnight," she interrupted. "In the summer house, not the library. Jonathan will be insensible by then. He and the judge have been matching each other glass for glass." She moved toward the door, then paused. "Bring the pages you've been writing. All of them." Before he could respond, she was gone, leaving him with a mixture of dread and anticipation that made his hands unsteady as he finished clearing the table. The storm broke fully as evening deepened into night. Rain lashed against the windows of the main house, and lightning illuminated the grounds in brief, ghostly flashes. The weather provided cover. The noise of the downpour would mask footsteps, and few would choose to be out watching on such a night, but it also added complications. The paths would be muddy, visibility poor. In the cabin, Elijah waited as the others fell into exhausted sleep around him. Samuel's words from that morning echoed in his mind. "Whatever you're thinking of doing, don't. Not yet. Eyes everywhere right now." The older man's warning had proven prescient, given the test the masters had arranged. Yet the news of Louisiana changed everything. If Caldwell moved his household, any chance of freedom, any chance of a different life, would vanish like morning mist. Decisions that might have waited now demanded immediate attention. When the cabin was filled with the deep breathing and occasional snores of sleeping men, Elijah carefully reached beneath the floorboard and retrieved his hidden papers. The story he had written for Isabella, yes, but also the crude map and the careful notes he had made about routes north, safe houses, sympathetic contacts. Information gathered painstakingly over years, each piece a potential death sentence if discovered. He wrapped the papers in oilcloth to protect them from the rain and tucked them inside his shirt. Then, moving with the silent precision that years of caution had taught him, he slipped out into the storm. The rain was a solid wall of water, soaking him instantly despite the oilcloth he'd used to shield the precious papers. Lightning flashed, illuminating the path toward the summer house, a small, ornate structure at the edge of the formal gardens where Isabella sometimes took tea with visiting ladies during pleasant weather. Keeping to the shadows, despite the downpour, Elijah made his way across the grounds. The mud sucked at his bare feet, and twice he froze as lightning revealed the landscape too clearly for comfort. But the storm was his ally too, providing cover that would have been impossible on a clear night. The summer house loomed ahead, a pale shape against the darkness. As he approached, he saw a faint light within. Not a lamp, which might be noticed from the main house, but a single candle shielded from view. Isabella was already there, wrapped in a dark cloak, her hair hidden beneath its hood. The candle cast dramatic shadows across her face, emphasizing the tension in her features. "You came," she said as he entered, relief evident in her voice. "I wasn't certain you would." "It's madness," he replied, water streaming from his clothes onto the wooden floor. "If we're discovered—" "We won't be," she interrupted. "Jonathan is unconscious in his study. The guests have retired. Even Jackson wouldn't patrol in this weather." Elijah wasn't convinced, but he was here now. He removed the oilcloth package from inside his shirt and placed it on the small table beside the candle. "The pages you asked for." Isabella unwrapped them carefully, her fingers gentle with the damp paper. "Your story," she murmured, setting those pages aside. Then her eyes fell on the map, and her breath caught. "And this?" "Away north," he said simply. "If one had reason to travel." She studied the crude drawing, tracing the route with her fingertip. "Through the swamp? That's extremely dangerous." "Less dangerous than the roads, where patrols watch for runaways." He hesitated. "Isabella, why did you want to meet tonight? After everything that happened today?" "Because we're running out of time," she said, looking up from the map to meet his gaze directly. "Jonathan's suspicions. The move to Louisiana. Events are accelerating beyond our control." "What are you suggesting?" Elijah asked, though part of him already knew the answer, had perhaps known it since their first meeting in the library. Isabella took a deep breath, as if gathering courage. "Come with me," she said. "North, to freedom." The words hung in the air between them, momentous and terrifying. Elijah stared at her, trying to comprehend what she was proposing. "You want to run away? Both of us?" The idea seemed impossible, fantastic. "Isabella, you're the mistress of Willow Creek. You have position, security." "I have a gilded cage," she interrupted, her voice suddenly fierce. "A life of meaningless social obligations and moral compromise. Watching cruelty I can't prevent, participating in a system I despise." Her hand found his in the dim light. "These past months in the library with you? That's the only time I've felt truly alive." The touch of her fingers against his sent a current through Elijah's body. They had been careful until now, maintaining physical distance despite their growing emotional connection. This deliberate contact represented a crossing of boundaries that couldn't be undone. "It would be dangerous beyond anything you can imagine," he said, not pulling away. "Even if we reached the North, the Fugitive Slave Act means we'd never be truly safe. And for you, a Southern woman traveling with a black man, the scandal alone would destroy you." "I don't care about scandal," she said fiercely, "and we wouldn't stay in the United States. Canada, perhaps, or Europe." "With what resources?" he asked, practical concerns asserting themselves despite the wild hope her words had kindled. "Caldwell would pursue us. There would be rewards, hunters." "I have resources of my own," Isabella replied. "My grandmother left me a small inheritance that Jonathan doesn't control. It's held in trust in Philadelphia. Enough to establish ourselves somewhere new." Lightning flashed, illuminating her face fully, the determination in her eyes, the slight tremble of her lips betraying her fear despite her brave words. In that moment, Elijah realized that she had been planning this longer than he had suspected, considering possibilities he had barely dared to contemplate. "When?" he asked, the single word carrying the weight of decision. 3 nights from now," she answered promptly. "After the guests depart. Jonathan plans to visit the Wilkinson plantation to discuss the Louisiana venture. He'll be gone overnight." Her fingers tightened around his. "We'd have a full day's head start before anyone realized we were missing." The plan was taking shape between them, dangerous and exhilarating. Yet Elijah hesitated, other faces rising in his mind. "What about the others?" he asked. "Samuel, Harriet, all those who would remain behind?" Isabella's expression sobered. "We can't save everyone, Elijah. Not now, but perhaps once we're established somewhere safe." She trailed off, the enormity of what they were contemplating settling over them both. The candle guttered in a draft, sending shadows dancing across the walls of the summer house. Outside, the storm continued unabated, rain drumming on the roof like impatient fingers. "I need to know," Isabella said softly. "Will you come with me?" Before Elijah could answer, a new sound cut through the storm's cacophony. The baying of hounds, distant but distinct. They looked at each other in alarm. "The dogs shouldn't be out in this weather," Elijah said, moving to the door and peering into the darkness. "Perhaps they broke free from the kennels," Isabella suggested, though her tone betrayed her unease. Another flash of lightning revealed a sight that froze Elijah's blood. Figures moving across the lawn from the direction of the main house, lanterns bobbing in the darkness, the shapes of dogs straining at their leashes. "They're searching," he whispered, drawing back from the door. "Isabella, they know you're gone." Fear flashed across her face, quickly replaced by determination. "We need to separate," she said, gathering the papers from the table and pressing them into his hands. "I'll return to the house by the kitchen garden. I can claim I was checking on a sick maid." "And me?" "The stables," she said after a moment's thought. "Say you were securing the horses during the storm. Jackson knows you worked with them before being assigned to the fields." It was a flimsy excuse, but better than being discovered together in the summer house with incriminating papers. Elijah rewrapped the pages in their oilcloth covering. "3 nights," Isabella said, gripping his arm. "Whatever happens now, remember the plan. 3 nights from now, at the north boundary where the creek narrows." He nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in his throat. She hesitated, then rose on her tiptoes to press her lips briefly, fiercely against his. Their first kiss, stolen in a moment of danger. "Go," she whispered, and then she was gone, slipping out into the storm, her dark cloak blending with the shadows. Elijah waited until she had a head start, then moved in the opposite direction, keeping low and using the rain as cover. The voices of the search party grew louder, and he caught fragments of angry conversation carried on the wind. "Check the outbuildings." "Couldn't have gone far in this weather." "Dogs can't pick up a scent in this downpour." He skirted the edge of the formal garden, staying among the trees where possible. The stables were just ahead, their solid shape a darker mass against the night sky. If he could reach them before the search party, her plan might work. Lightning flashed again, and in that instant of harsh illumination, Elijah saw a figure directly in his path, Jackson, the overseer, his face twisted in a triumphant snarl. "Thought you were clever, didn't you, boy?" Jackson said, raising his lantern higher. "Master Caldwell's going to be mighty interested in what you're doing out here in the middle of the night." Elijah froze, the package of papers burning against his chest like a brand. Discovery meant not just punishment, but death. For himself, certainly, and possibly for Isabella as well. In that moment of clarity, he made his decision. 3 nights from now had just become tonight. With a sudden move born of desperation, he lunged forward, knocking the lantern from Jackson's hand. It fell to the muddy ground with a splash, the flame extinguished instantly. In the darkness that followed, Elijah ran, not toward the stables as planned, but toward the north boundary and the narrow creek beyond. Behind him, Jackson's shouts alerted the search party. The baying of the hounds intensified, and multiple lanterns converged on the overseer's position. But Elijah had the advantage of darkness and intimate knowledge of the land he had worked for years. The rain continued to fall, washing away his scent and muffling the sounds of his passage as he ran toward an uncertain future, and the hope of freedom. The rain became Elijah's ally as he fled, masking his footsteps and providing brief illumination with each lightning flash. Behind him, Jackson led the search party, falsely claiming the hounds had his scent despite the storm making tracking impossible. Reaching the wood's edge, Elijah paused behind an oak to observe the searchers' lanterns forming a ragged line across the fields. With a silent prayer, he plunged into the forest, navigating treacherous terrain despite twice falling and injuring his shoulder. When he reached the creek, now a roaring, swollen obstacle, voices approaching from behind left no choice. Spotting a fallen tree extending partially across the water, Elijah made his way to its end before launching himself into the churning current. "There he is," someone yelled. "Shoot him," Jackson commanded. A pistol shot rang out but missed. Remembering Samuel's advice about strong currents, Elijah angled himself downstream while working toward the opposite bank. When his feet struck a submerged branch, he used it to push himself forward, finally reaching the far shore and crawling up the muddy slope. For the first time in his life, he was no longer on Caldwell land. According to his map, he needed to travel north about 5 miles to reach a blacksmith who might help. Despite exhaustion, he rose and continued walking. By dawn, Elijah reached a small clearing with a cabin and workshop. A tall man emerged, Isaiah Freeman, the blacksmith rumored to help runaways. "I see you there," Freeman called gently. "Come out, no one else is here." Elijah emerged, his appearance betraying his difficult journey. "You've come far," Freeman observed. "Warm yourself while I fetch food and clothes." The blacksmith revealed he'd been expecting travelers due to increased patrol activity and correctly identified Elijah as from Willow Creek Plantation. "There's been talk about Caldwell's wife taking unusual interest in one of their slaves, teaching him to read, some say." Freeman offered hiding space beneath his workshop floor, then asked, "You came alone? The woman didn't join you?" "We were discovered meeting. She returned to the house while I ran." "White women rarely leave their position safety no matter what they promise in private moments," Freeman cautioned. "She'll come," Elijah insisted, "if she can." Meanwhile, at Willow Creek, Isabella faced her husband's interrogation. "Explain why you were outside during a thunderstorm at 1 o'clock in the morning," Caldwell demanded. "I was checking on Sarah, the ill kitchen maid," Isabella replied steadily. "And Jackson saw you coming from the summer house, not the servants' quarters," Caldwell countered. "What of the books and writings found in the slave's cabin?" This news shocked Isabella, though she maintained her composure. "How would I know anything about that? The writing implements could have been accessed by any house servant." Senator Hargrove redirected the conversation toward recapturing Elijah, and Isabella excused herself. In her chambers, Harriet waited anxiously. Together they burned incriminating papers from Isabella's desk. "What will you do now?" Harriet asked afterward. "If I were to leave," Isabella said carefully, "what would you do?" "My place is with you. It always has been." 3 nights from now," Isabella whispered. "Jonathan leaves for the Wilkinson plantation. If we're going to act, it must be then." From the window, they watched neighboring plantation owners arriving to organize search parties. "They'll comb every inch between here and the state line," Isabella observed. "The Lord protect him," Harriet whispered. "And us," Isabella added softly. "God protect us all."